Revenge with Karen.
The phone rang at 3:11 a.m., a shrill, sharp burst that cut through the humming silence of the control center like a scalpel to skin. Darlene didn't flinch. She never flinched. Not when a tornado ripped through the Tulsa substation in '09. Not when a drunk technician accidentally triggered a false overload cascade in Little Rock. Not when her husband packed a suitcase on a Tuesday night and left a note that said, "I miss being seen." But now, just picked up the receiver, half glasses sliding down her nose, and answered like she always did. "Collins, control floor, go ahead." The voice on the other end was green, panic bubbling under every syllable. I'm seeing a swing in line 17 again, but the system isn't compensating, and got it," she cut in, already typing. Her fingers moved with the lazy speed of confidence. The screen pulsed amber. A voltage mismatch, 3% drift. Nothing big, nothing the software couldn't theoretically autocorrect. But theory and Texas don't always get along, and neither do algorithms and winter wind. She tapped a few keys, manually adjusted the feeder load, and dropped the draw from 62% to 54% in exactly 12.7 seconds. The amber flicker died. Silence returned. The kid on the phone hadn't even finished his next sentence. "You're good. It's stable now," she said, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold. He mumbled something grateful, fumbling with a thank you like it owed her rent. She didn't need it. Darlene didn't do this for thanks. She did it because 3 states stayed warm when she didn't blink. Oklahoma slept through its night shifts because she didn't sneeze at the wrong voltage reading. Babies got born in lit hospitals, and old folks kept breathing through CPAPs because Darlene knew when a substation was lying. Behind her, junior tech Megan, 26, bright-eyed and still thinking caffeine was a substitute for instinct, watched like a sponge with a heartbeat. "How'd you know it wasn't a sensor error?" she asked. Darlene didn't answer right away. She clicked open a notepad document titled Contingency Patterns, then closed it again without reading. Line 17 always twitches during a barometric drop. Storm's coming. The software reads it late. Human eyes don't. Megan nodded like she understood. She didn't, not yet, but she would, if corporate didn't gut them first. "You know, the funny thing about being invisible is no one notices you. Until you leave. Speaking of which, before you get lost in the story, do us a quick favor. Tap subscribe and toss a like our way." Yeah, everyone says that, but seriously, it helps more than a third cup of gas station coffee on a double shift. Keeps the lights on, literally. Anyway, back to Darlene. She stood, stretching her back with a slow, practiced motion that made her spine pop like a popcorn kernel in oil. She walked over to the far wall, past rows of blinking panels, and a humming data core that some VP once called her pet robot. She reached up and pulled down a 3-inch thick binder, spine cracked, pages marked with multicolored tabs and sticky notes. The cover read, "Contingencies D1 through D7. Handwritten, all of it, not printed, not digitized. She didn't trust files that could be deleted with one bad update. She flipped to D3, overload plus faulty armation during winter demand. Scanned it, updated a note in pencil, crossed something out, added C17A drift pattern and drew a star. Quietly she added, "Storm pre-signals likely by Thursday. Test overrides Wednesday." No one noticed her do this. No one ever did. Cameras above the floor hadn't recorded a single facial expression from her in 15 years. The biometric logs only tracked her presence. Not her judgment, not her gut, not her corrections before they became disasters. Megan leaned in again. "You think the new load balancing system's ready for this storm?" Darlene didn't laugh. That wasn't her way. She just slid the binder back into its spot, like a sword into a sheath, and said, "If it is, it won't need me. But if it's not, well, let's hope it is." By 4:07 a.m., she had resolved 5 minor inconsistencies in voltage flow, rerouted 2 relay fails, and corrected a bad sensor calibration from the Fort Smith substation that had been tripping alerts for the past 2 months. She filed the reports herself. Always did. Trusting others to understand the nuance was like handing your brake lines to a toddler with scissors. The next shift rolled in at 6. Darlene nodded to the guy relieving her, Daniels, good man, if a little too married to dashboards, and walked toward the break room. Her coat hung on a hook labeled Legacy Staff. A joke someone from facilities had slapped up with a label maker, not realizing she took it as a badge of honor. She slipped it on. The cold morning wind hit her like a truth she already knew. Things were changing, and not for the better. The screen flickered to life at exactly 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. Company-wide video call. mandatory attendance. The kind of virtual sermon where no one said anything honest, and everyone nodded like bobbleheads trying to keep their jobs. Darlene didn't even try to fake a smile. She sat at the back of the control room, arms crossed, thermos untouched, watching the pixelated face of Bryant Hollister beam in like a used car salesman with too much gel and not enough brains. "Good morning, energy heroes," he chirped, flashing teeth that looked power-washed. "I'm thrilled to lead this region into the modern era of energy delivery and digital transformation." Darlene's eye twitched. He was maybe 35, tops. Hair slicked like he thought the grid respected charisma. His resume read like LinkedIn on Adderall. Consulting firms, some startup that burned $80 million and vanished, and 2 years at corporate HQ where he apparently became an expert on cost-to-value ratio optimization. Translation: he knew how to cut people. She scanned the room. The younger techs were scribbling notes. Megan, poor thing, had even highlighted the word transformation in pink. Bryant kept talking. "This region has a proud legacy, but legacies don't power innovation. Our analysis shows a lopsided compensation curve, too much weight in senior salaries, not enough in growth roles." There it was, the execution wrapped in a TED talk. Darlene didn't blink. "Lean systems outperform sentimental ones," he continued. "We're auditing every six-figure role to ensure it aligns with our forward-facing strategy." Behind him, his virtual background glitched, momentarily showing a Starbucks cup and a crumpled takeout bag. Arlene saw more authenticity in that trash than in the man speaking. She didn't ask questions, didn't type in the chat, just clicked record screen and set her mouse down. Her nails tapped lightly on the desk. 13 taps, habit from her coding days. Muscle memory from when she used to rebuild interface nodes in DOS by candlelight during Hurricane Ike. Bryant wrapped up the call with a quote from Elon Musk. Arlene closed the window like it was a browser tab full of viruses. By lunchtime, he'd materialized in person, strolling through the command floor like he was touring a zoo. Shook a few hands, took selfies with some junior staff, gave Megan a fist bump that left her stunned. In the break room, Darlene sat alone at the end of a table, sipping coffee and annotating her binder. Bryant walked in with an HR rep, Janine, chipper woman with a folder full of NDAs and a nervous smile that said she hadn't slept since college. Bryant popped open a la croix and said to her, just loud enough for Darlene to hear, "You wouldn't believe how many grandma-level folks we've still got pulling six figures in this place." Not for long. Darlene looked up. No expression. No reaction. Just made a small note in the margin of D4, corporate tone escalation, emotional safety degradation likely. He didn't notice her, didn't even glance. Janine laughed too hard, that fake HR laugh, the one you use when your spine is on the line. Darlene stood, dropped her paper cup in the trash, and walked past them without a word. As she exited, her badge failed to open the override room. Twice. She frowned. Used her backup. Still nothing. The console's new biometric upgrade was in place. Glossy black slab with a green LED she didn't trust. She flagged Daniels. "Why's the override system changed?" He shrugged. "IT pushed a firmware update yesterday. New protocols. I think they reset the credentials for everyone who hasn't logged manual use in 6 months." She stared at the console like it had insulted her mother. "I wrote the manual use protocols." Daniels blinked. "Wait, seriously?" She walked away. Back at her desk, she opened the admin interface. Her credentials were intact, but her root override privileges were blanked. Her name wasn't on the manual escalation chain. She could still log in, she could still view, but the system didn't trust her to act, not without approval from above. She sent a ticket. Got a canned reply from IT. Per policy 7B, all legacy users must submit reauthorization through central operations. She closed the message. In her notebook, she wrote one line, "Removed from my own system. They call it modernization. I call it unlearning the fire drill." The rest of the shift passed in a fog. Bryant gave a speech at a town hall meeting on the ground floor, talked about energy democratization and algorithmic efficiency. Darlene watched it on mute. She looked down at her hands. Calloused, steady, capable of spotting a faulty capacitor with a flashlight and a hunch, now officially less qualified than an AI trained on 3 months of outage logs and corporate fantasies. The funny part? She wasn't even mad. Not really. Not yet. But something cold had settled behind her ribcage. A weight that hadn't been there before. The kind of cold that doesn't pass. She reached into her bag, pulled out a USB drive labeled "Last Resort Clean." And for the first time in her 26 years at the grid, she put it in her pocket. Glass walls made everything feel like theater. Bryant didn't invite her into a conference room. He summoned her to a stage, the kind where people perform firings with smiles and collaborative language, as if severance could be softened by a PowerPoint background and fresh carpet. "Hey, Darlene," he said, gesturing to a sterile chair opposite his MacBook. "Thanks for coming in on short notice." She sat, didn't say a word. Her thermos clicked as she set it down on the table. Metal against glass, a sharp, rude little sound that made Bryant's nostrils flare. Janine from HR was there too, holding a folder that didn't belong in this building. The folder had a script, a plan, a paper trail to blame later if someone sued. Bryant leaned back like he was settling into a TED talk. "So, listen, we're implementing some necessary rebalancing across our operational tiers. Efficiency reviews, budget streamlining, lining with corporate's long-term vision." Darlene blinked, just once, her face still as stone. Bryant smiled wider. "Effective this pay cycle, your salary will be adjusted by 51%, pending final performance and redundancy review. It's not personal, it's policy. You'll maintain your role and current responsibilities in the meantime." Janine didn't look up. She was circling something in the margins of form. Maybe a termination clause, maybe a place to initial. Ever it was, it didn't matter. Darlene sat for 3 full seconds without responding. Then she lifted her eyes to meet his and asked, "Do you understand what happens if the substation fails during manual sync?" Bryant blinked like someone who got called on in a class he thought he was teaching. "What? If the new load balancer fails to switch on phase 2 and the demand surge hits while the system's still syncing, do you understand what happens?" He shifted in his seat. "That's what the software's for, isn't it?" That's what he said, that exact line. Darlene smiled. For the first time in years, she let the corners of her mouth curl upward in something that looked like amusement, but didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone watching a child about to touch a hot stove after being told not to twice. She stood, slowly, picked up her thermos, slid it into her tote bag. Bryant raised a hand. "We'll need you to acknowledge receipt of the..." He powered down her console. Outside the room, through the glass, Megan was watching with wide eyes from the operations floor. Daniels was pretending not to look. Everyone else just kept typing. Darlene walked to her station, unplugged her ID badge reader, and typed in one last entry into the system log. Status: transition initiated. Local access secured. Field-level credentials retained per sec. ADA compliance. She opened the drawer no one had touched since 2014. Inside sat the binder, 3 inches thick. Tabs worn to the color of nicotine stains. Some of the sticky notes had peeled, but the writing held. It smelled like dust, graphite, and truth. She took it out, flipped past D1, D3, D4. Landed on D5. Substation collapse during cold surge manual override procedure when AI lockout detected. She stared at the line she'd written 10 winters ago in red ink. "Do not trust the AI to reroute voltage. Override manually at 74% capacity threshold. Delay equals failure." She slid the binder into her bag without looking up. No one noticed. No cameras blinked. No alarms triggered. The biometric logs didn't care. The system, new and shiny and proud, didn't even register her absence from the escalation chain. She walked to the exit. Bryant followed her halfway, holding his hands out in mock confusion. "Hey, whoa, no need to be dramatic. We're just reviewing. Nothing's decided yet." She didn't stop. He tried again. "You can't just walk out. We need transition documents. And wait, you haven't even signed the adjustment form." She paused at the threshold, turned back to look at him. And in the same flat, quiet tone she used to talk down power surges and rolling brownouts, she said, "You took my judgment out of the loop. Don't be surprised when the loop fails." And then she left. No big speech, no swan song, just footsteps on industrial tile and the soft hiss of the door closing behind her. Back at her now empty station, the screen flickered once, then defaulted to the login screen. The chair still held the shape of her weight. The mug, her grid mom one, sat in the corner of the desk with half an inch of black coffee cold and untouched. Daniels finally said it. Did she just quit? No one answered. On the mainframe, her final script, a simple diagnostic routine she'd created in 2008, ran one last time. It returned a status of manual sync protocol unverified. Recommend review before next storm cycle. The system ignored it. There was no one left authorized to approve that kind of warning. And so it passed into the logs, like a whisper before thunder. The letter wasn't long. 8 lines, single-spaced, Times New Roman, printed on the same gray-white stock the control center used for toner tests and funeral notices. Darlene slid it under HR's office door before sunrise. No fanfare, no subject line. Just her name, a date, and 2 words no one in that building had ever seen her write, effective immediately. By the time the coffee pot finished sputtering its first full brew, she was already gone. Control floor felt wrong without her. Not quiet, there were always hums and beeps and status chimes, but hollow, like a house still holding the heat of a fire that had just burned out. At 9:12 a.m., Bryant strutted through the office in a blazer tight enough to show off his gym subscription and just loose enough to suggest he'd never lifted a toolbox. He clapped Daniels on the back, scanned the room, and said far too loudly, well, no hard feelings. He was retiring soon anyway. Automations replacing that whole workflow in 6 weeks. Nobody laughed. Daniels didn't even blink. Megan muttered something under her breath that rhymed with prick, then buried herself in the thermal readout logs. Everyone kept typing, but now the keys sounded like rainfall on metal. Darlene's desk was stripped clean. No personal items, no photos, not even her usual thermos ring on the laminate. The whiteboard behind her station, once filled with handwritten voltage predictions and microgrid fallback diagrams, was erased, wiped with the kind of ruthless precision you expect from someone leaving nothing behind. Except one thing. Dead center on the whiteboard, held down with a neon pink magnet, was a sticky note. 3 words, black Sharpie, all caps, run tests before Monday. That was it. No arrow, no signature. Just those 4 inches of fluorescent paper with the weight of a thunderhead. Megan found it at lunch. Is this a joke? She asked aloud. Daniels walked over, read it, then looked toward the grid simulation monitor. Cold front hits Monday. Yeah, but the system passed the load test last week. Daniels didn't respond. He stared at the sticky note like it was written in fire. Bryant overheard and waved it off. She always thought worst case. That note's just parting paranoia. We've already pushed the AI thresholds up. System adjusts in real time now. He said it like someone who thought thermostats and power distribution were the same thing. In a forgotten corner of the server room, Darlene's contingency script was still present in the job scheduler queue, but it had been disabled by the last patch. Nobody noticed. The log entry read, obsolete manual process flagged for review. She had anticipated that. Back at her house, just a ranch-style place on the edge of Garland with an old generator in the garage she maintained better than the city maintained its roads, Darlene folded her grid ID badge in half. Then again, until it snapped like cheap plastic should. She set the pieces on her kitchen counter next to a note labeled Estate Non-Digital Assets. Then she opened her closet, pulled down a fireproof safe, and unlocked it. Inside, her credentialed tablet, one with root-level access she hadn't used in over a year, and the drive labeled Last Resort Clean. Still sealed, still cold. She set them both on the table, stared at them for a long time. Her phone buzzed. Group chat from the grid crew. Megan had texted, "Did you actually leave? WTF?" Daniels followed up, Bryant spinning it like you were dead weight. Everyone's on edge. She didn't reply. Instead, she picked up the old landline, of those beige plastic phones with a coiled cord and a ring like a war crime, and called the diner down the street. Ordered 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, and a side of hash browns. The same order she used to place after double shifts. When the waitress asked if she wanted her usual booth, Darlene just said, "No, I'll take it to go." Storm's coming. By the time Friday ended, corporate had deleted her user profile from the grid operations directory. Her override credentials were purged, at least on paper. They never figured out the backdoor she wrote in 06, the one no one ever noticed because it was filed under a deprecated diagnostic routine called Winter Map Legacy Sync. They couldn't delete what they didn't know existed. And still, that sticky note stayed on the board all weekend. Neon pink. 3 words, slowly collecting dust as the temperatures dropped, and the news ran back-to-back segments about the first hard freeze sweeping down from the Rockies. Nobody ran the tests. There was too much else to do. Bryant had interviews lined up, press junkets, a Monday feature about the human-less grid airing on regional news. He was too busy to notice that the silence growing around him had a shape, a woman-shaped hole, one nobody could fill, and Monday was already whispering. Friday night passed without incident. Saturday morning arrived with a snap of frost on the air and the first real bite of winter rolling off the plains. At 6:42 a.m., a junior technician named Kyle, 23, recently poached from an app development firm, stared at a diagnostic screen he didn't understand and clicked approve on a test report flagged caution, sync mismatch. The warning was in yellow, not red. That's what made the difference. Red meant stop. Yellow just meant you could keep going if you squinted and pretended it wasn't your problem. What Kyle didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that the sync mismatch wasn't cosmetic. It was tied to a manual escalation hook, one Darlene had embedded years ago to catch late-night drift between substations during cold surges. The automation update had flagged it because it didn't recognize the routine. The system thought it was obsolete code. So, Kyle clicked override warning. The log updated. Status, pass with exception. 15 seconds later, the warning vanished from the active screen. It was still buried in the backend logs, of course, but no one checked those unless something was already on fire. At 8:03 a.m., Bryant sat in a studio downtown, makeup dusted on his nose, smiling for the camera. The segment was pre-recorded, part of a new Faces of Energy leadership series, sponsored by a local news affiliate and a corporate partner that used the word synergy like it paid rent. We've modernized our control team, Bryant beamed, streamlined it, removed redundancies. We're embracing innovation over institutional dependency. I believe in our software and our people, and in the future of a frictionless energy experience. The anchor nodded like a dashboard bobblehead. So, no more reliance on, say, long-tenured employees or manual overrides. Bryant chuckled. Let's just say we're no longer running on gut instinct. Darlene watched the interview from a tiny cafe in Greenville, her novel open to chapter 14, but untouched since chapter 11. She had picked a window seat, not for the view, but for the plug socket. Her tablet sat in her tote bag, powered down. Still credentialed, still holding every contingency she'd written in the last 2 decades. She didn't smile, didn't frown either, just watched as Bryant's face flickered on the mounted flat screen behind the counter, glowing like a bad omen reflected in coffee-stained chrome. The TV muted itself when the sports ticker ran across the bottom, and Darlene returned to her book. It was a thriller about a detective who solved murders by noticing the smallest details, coffee cup angles, blink patterns, things like that. Darlene didn't care about the plot. She just liked that someone in the world still noticed things before they exploded. A waitress came by. Need a refill, hon? Darlene nodded. Just decaf. Outside, a truck kicked up a plume of salt from the edge of the road, tires spinning as the wind picked up. The storm was already close. You could feel it in the air, heavy, sharp, full of invisible edges. Back at Grid HQ, Daniels was sweating through a diagnostic rerun. He'd seen Kyle approve that warning, but he didn't say anything at the time. Now it gnawed at him. Something about the sync timing felt off. He tried to pull the backend log, but hit a permissions wall, post-update protocol 9b. Only managerial accounts could access flagged redundancies. Bryant had restricted Daniels' clearance the week prior, said it was to prevent confusion. So Daniels wrote it down in his notebook. Pull full sync log Monday, 7 a.m. Double-check surge thresholds, then underlined it twice. He didn't know that by Monday, those logs would be useless, or that by Monday, 3 states would be running on a razor's edge of demand and untested code. Back in the cafe, Darlene glanced up from her novel again. The TV had cut to weather. Snowstorm advisory, now upgraded to severe across the southern and central plains. Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas should expect sustained sub-freezing temps beginning Sunday evening, with peak demand expected Monday morning between 4 and 8 a.m. Residents are advised to prepare for outages and stay indoors if possible. The map behind the anchor looked like someone had spilled milk across 3 states and shaded it with blue marker. Substations lit up like bones under an X-ray. Darlene reached into her bag, pulled out a napkin, jotted down 2 words, Monday surge. The waitress returned with her refill. Storm's gonna be nasty, she said. Darlene gave the smallest nod. It always is when folks think they've got it solved. She folded the napkin, slid it into her novel between chapters 11 and 12, and pushed her mug away, untouched. By late afternoon, Bryant was trending on LinkedIn. Corporate had reposted his interview with a caption that read, "Future-driven leadership, inside the grid of tomorrow." Someone in PR had added a sparkle emoji. In the comments, Darlene's old supervisor, retired 5 years ago, posted a single response. Hope tomorrow has backup power. No one at HQ saw it. They were too busy preparing their Monday readiness decks. Meanwhile, Arlene watched the last sliver of sunlight vanish behind a wall of gray clouds rolling in low and heavy over the plains. She didn't reach for her tablet. Not yet. The first flicker hit Amarillo at 7:18 p.m. Saturday night, a blink. Half a second of hesitation in the grid. Most folks didn't notice. It was the kind of dip you'd blame on an old light bulb or a loose plug. But the systems noticed. Deep in the code, buried under automation layers Bryant never bothered to read, the mainframe spat out a single word: drift. The automation kicked in, just like it was trained to. It did what the algorithms told it, redirected load from substation 12A to 14C, attempted to buffer the strain using standard winter surge protocols. But something didn't align. The new AI optimizer, pushed live last week, hadn't synced with the legacy fallback triggers. Instead of staggering the reroute across 3 lines, it shoved it all down one. By 7:26, a second substation hiccuped. This one near Panhandle. A few HVACs stuttered. Traffic lights twitched. A municipal pump tripped offline and reset. Still nothing major. Still not enough for any of the new hires to panic. At 7:31, the systems registered a cascading delay in load verification. The automation should have slowed the draw. The AI interpreted the delay as a sensor error and ignored it. No one called it in. Until 7:44. Megan, tired, eyes strained, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, watched as another alert flashed red. She didn't wait this time. She ran straight to the diagnostics terminal and did the thing Darlene had taught her on her 3rd day: trust the surge. Questioned the comm. Screen lit up with mismatches across 4 substations. She grabbed the emergency line handset and dialed the override dispatch. It rang 4 times. Then, "We're sorry, all emergency operators are currently assisting others. Please leave a message." Megan hung up, redialed, got the same voicemail. Daniels was off shift. Kyle was in the building, but he was in the server room trying to figure out why his badge no longer let him into the manual override panel. IT had revoked physical access pending new security clearances. By 8:00 p.m., 2 secondary substations tripped offline. Lights went out across 30 square miles of rural grid. Not a full blackout, but enough that people started lighting candles, checking their phones, wondering if the storm had arrived early. Inside her house, Darlene didn't move. She sat on the couch, tablet untouched on the coffee table. The fire was out, the room dim. Outside, wind screamed through the eaves, sleet tapping the windows like fingernails. She knew. She had known the moment the first flicker hit. Not because she was watching the data feed, she wasn't. Not because someone called her, no one had. She knew because the system had no guardian. Because when you gut a spine, the body still walks for a while until it falls. At 8:17, Megan tried to trigger the manual escalation script. It failed. Screen flashed a message in white on black. Escalation blocked, override credential required. She hit it again. Same result. She searched the directory. Nothing. She called Daniels. No answer. She hit the call button again. Override blocked. Buried beneath the glossy automation layers, behind the dashboards and the flashy UI Bryant loved to show off in meetings, Darlene's legacy script sat like a sleeping dog with teeth. He had written it during the 2011 freeze, after 3 substations failed in unison. Back then, she had hard-coded a rule: no mass escalation during winter surge without credentialed manual approval. She'd submitted it to IT. They'd ignored it, so she buried it in a utility routine disguised as a redundancy check, flagged to only activate if automation crossed a certain mismatch threshold. That threshold had been crossed at 8:03 p.m. How the system was following orders it didn't understand. Orders to wait. Orders to pause. Orders that required a name and a code only one person still alive knew: Darlene's. And she sat there watching the wind rip branches from her neighbor's tree. A branch slapped against her siding made the wall shudder. She didn't flinch. She didn't feel triumph or glee, just a hollow sort of knowing. She picked up her tablet, powered it on. The screen glowed. Her login prompt appeared. She stared at it for a long time. In the top corner, a warning flashed. Escalation request region 3, credential required. Time remaining 01:32:19. The system had finally routed the request to her legacy access. The timer ticked down. She set the tablet aside without logging in, got up, made tea, sat back down. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was just done. and the wind howled louder. At 4:47 a.m. Sunday morning, Amarillo went dark. Not a flicker, not a surge, a full dead black. 3 seconds later, Wichita Falls followed, then Tulsa, then Hot Springs, then Texarkana tripped like a falling domino, taking every smaller substation tethered to it down with it. The lights didn't dim, they vanished. Coffee machines blinked off mid-brew. Security alarms screeched before flatlining. Emergency lines overloaded before anyone could even say hello. Within 4 minutes, 17 hospitals across 3 states switched to backup generators. 7 of those failed within the hour, old diesel systems choked by cold and disuse. 2 NICU had to be evacuated. 1 failed mid-procedure. A father in Bentonville sat in a silent waiting room while the surgical light over his wife flickered and died. No one told him what it meant. Traffic systems buckled. Without power, grid that kept lights staggered, and intersections orderly turned into a haunted maze of frozen intersections. At 5:03 a.m., an ambulance clipped a truck in Oklahoma City trying to navigate an unlit interchange. The EMT driving had been working 13 hours. He hadn't seen the stoplight was already out. And in the middle of it, back at HQ, Bryant stood in the command floor like a prophet whose God had stopped returning calls. His hair was messy. I loosened. The jacket was gone. A ring of sweat clung to his underarms like bruises. He was red in the face and holding a phone to each ear, one on speaker, one pressed tight. "Fix it," he screamed at the IT director over the line. "Fix the system. Reboot the automation. Run the patch again. I don't care how." A tinny voice responded, "Sir, we can't. The system's in credential-locked escalation. It's requesting override authorization from a flagged root user. Protocol doesn't allow rerouting without." Bryant slammed his palm against the desk. "Then change the protocol." "Sir," the voice paused. "That user is D. Collins." Silence. Bryant looked up at Daniels, who had just arrived, jacket still half on, cheeks wind-burned from the run across the parking lot. "D. Collins," Bryant repeated. "She's retired." Daniels nodded, slowly. "Yeah. And she's the only one who ever updated the escalation logic, built the fallback routines. She hardwired the override credential." Another voice came in from IT. "We can't even see the script. It's legacy. Handwritten, not documented in the last patch cycle. The system's treating it like law. Can you trace it?" "We did. It's pinging her credentialed device." "A tablet, probably, but it's offline." Bryant's face drained of color. "Call her. Email. Knock on her door. I don't care. Get her to log in." "She doesn't answer," Daniels muttered. "Hasn't since Friday." Bryant picked up the landline and dialed her number with the desperation of a man who just realized his parachute was packed with paper towels. Voicemail. He tried her email. It bounced. He called someone from corporate, started yelling about NDAs and lawsuits, and who was supposed to control failovers. Nobody answered with anything useful. At 5:18 a.m., he turned to the room and barked, "Anyone in here know how to bypass her script?" Dead silence. The automation screens pulsed red. Load drift continued. The AI was paralyzed, waiting for a credential it couldn't forge, a human it couldn't replace. Meanwhile, in a small ranch house 20 miles outside Garland, Darlene sat in the dark. She hadn't lost power. Her generator kicked in 5 minutes earlier. Her kettle hissed on the gas stove. The tablet sat in front of her, awake now, glowing with a soft green light. The screen flashed once. Request. Manual override authorization, level A, confirmed to engage full system sync, remaining time to collapse. 00:29:41. She stared at it. Her fingers twitched. She hadn't trembled in years. Not during storms, not during grid failures, not even during the divorce when he'd said he was taking the truck and the dog and the house and left her with nothing but silence. But now, her hands shook. Not because she was scared, because she knew the weight of what came next. To log in meant saving them. To log in meant letting Bryant win. To log in meant patching a wound caused by arrogance so deep it would fester again the moment the lights came back on. So she didn't. She pushed the tablet aside. Got up. Poured tea into a cracked ceramic mug that said Watt Warrior in faded red letters. Sat back down, wrapped both hands around it like it held something more sacred than warmth. Outside, the storm had begun in earnest. Wind gusts like freight trains, branches snapping. Somewhere down the block, a transformer burst in a crack of blue lightning. Darlene didn't flinch. She watched the countdown tick in the corner of the screen. 00:27:53. No one had asked her to stay. No one had believed she was still necessary. Now, we're learning what absence really meant. and still she didn't reach for the tablet. By 6:07 a.m., the blackout had a name, the Cascade. By 6:13, it had a trending hashtag, #Gridgen. And by 6:30, it had hit every national outlet like a slap across the face during a church sermon. CNN's Chiron screamed in red, 3-state blackout, grid failure or human error. Fox called it an infrastructure collapse. Where's the leadership? Even Weather Channel got in on the bloodbath. Coldest night, darkest hour. The system that let America down. All across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, homes sat cold and breathless. Portable heaters died. CPAP machines went limp. Gas stations ran on battery lights until those failed too. The highways were silent. Nothing but stranded cars and flickering hazards fading out like stars at dawn. Inside HQ, Bryant looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 hours. They finally dragged him in front of a camera at 7:03 a.m. The local ABC affiliate set up a satellite feed inside the operations conference room, where the background was still blinking with silent red alerts, screaming into the void. The reporter asked, "Sir, can you confirm whether this was a software failure?" Bryant blinked. "We believe the automation platform encountered a conflict with legacy routines. The system, misinterpreted escalation triggers." There was no indication. He choked on the word human, then said it anyway. "No human error in our live protocols. We are currently working with, vendor support teams to address the anchor interrupted. We've received reports that a manual override was requested and blocked." "Is that true?" Bryant's eyes darted to someone off camera. That is still under investigation. It's complicated. Are many layers to our response hierarchy. There may have been legacy code still in effect. At 7:26 a.m., the CEO appeared on a separate segment, live from a darkened downtown boardroom lit only by camera lights and a backup generator. He didn't smile, didn't blink much either. He said one sentence that changed everything. This wasn't sabotage. This was subtraction. And with that, the story broke wide open. The board panicked. Meetings stacked on top of calls, stacked on top of frantic, whispered blame. Investor lines rang out with demands for accountability. A senator from Arkansas tweeted, "Time for heads to roll. What kind of operation has a single point of failure in the hands of a retired staffer?" And then the name came out. Darlene Collins. It leaked from an engineer, graybeard named Mac Gruder, who'd been retired for years, but still hung around the edges of disaster like smoke after a kitchen fire. He said it on air with the kind of reverence usually reserved for war heroes and kindergarten teachers who worked through chemo. Only one person ever knew how to manually balance when this happened before. That was Darlene Collins. She built the contingencies, knew every substation like she'd birthed them herself. By 8:00 a.m., name was on every screen. By 8:05, her photo had gone viral. It was an old ID badge photo, faded smile, eyes squinting just a little from too many double shifts, a stray wisp of gray hair curling near her temple. The kind of face you pass in a hallway and don't notice until it's gone. Twitter lost its mind. She warned them. They replaced her with a spreadsheet. "Retire this, Bryant. Darlene Collins is the human firewall." They didn't know where she was. Some claimed she died. Others said she was in Montana, living off-grid. Someone posted a photo of a woman buying donuts in Garland that morning and captioned it, "If this is her, let her eat free forever." Inside her living room, Darlene watched it all unfold on a tiny TV propped up near the wood stove. The tea had long since gone cold. The tablet sat untouched on the armrest. She saw her face flash on the news, saw Bryant stammer, saw the CEO freeze, felt something twist in her chest. Not anger, not pride, a hollow ache, vindication wrapped in barbed wire. She could have stopped it, she knew that. If she'd logged in 4 hours ago, half of this mess would have resolved before dawn. The power would be up, the infants breathing easy, the traffic flowing again. And yet her hands stayed folded, because this collapse wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a glitch. It was a prophecy ignored. They hadn't listened when she told them to test the system, hadn't seen her value until it cost them everything. Back at HQ, Daniels finally noticed the sticky note. Still clinging to the whiteboard, fluorescent pink, slanted slightly to the left. "Run tests before Monday." He stood there, staring at it while the room buzzed with crisis calls. He whispered, "She told us." And nobody had listened. The hearing room was packed. Reporters elbowed one another for front-row seats, lenses twitching, notebooks primed. Behind the desk sat the CEO of Tri-State Grid Management, looking like he'd swallowed glass. Every light above him buzzed. Every eye in that wood-paneled room waited for him to say the words they already knew, but needed to hear under oath. He straightened his tie, took a sip of water with hands that didn't quite stop shaking, cleared his throat. The chairman of the inquiry leaned in. "Mr. Carmichael, the people of 3 states spent 72 hours without power. We have dozens of documented injuries, several deaths, economic losses in the hundreds of millions. Was this a deliberate act? Was it sabotage?" A long silence followed, the kind that stretches like a tightrope between survival and collapse. And then Carmichael said, in a voice just loud enough to reach the back row, "No, this was not sabotage. This was subtraction." He let the words settle like ash. "We removed the one person who never let this happen." The air went still. C-SPAN cut to a slow zoom on his face. CNN ran the quote across their lower third before he'd even blinked. #subtraction trended nationwide within 15 minutes. A reporter stood and called out, "Is it true she warned you that there was a note?" Carmichael nodded. "Yes, there was a note. There were logs. There were contingencies. And he stopped himself. Some of us didn't believe they were necessary anymore." Bryant wasn't in the room. Resigned quietly the night before. No press release. No farewell email. Just a scrubbed LinkedIn profile and a glass door swinging shut behind him. The official report would say procedural gaps and oversight failures. The press would say arrogance. The people who lived it would call it what it was, preventable. Back in Garland, Darlene watched the hearing with the volume turned low and the captions on. She sat on her porch, wrapped in an old quilt, cradling her coffee like it held a world she didn't want to drop. Her name came up over a dozen times in that one session. Lawmakers invoked her like a ghost, the last line of defense, a lost institutional memory, proof that legacy doesn't mean obsolete. A senator from Oklahoma suggested a plaque in her honor. Another from Arkansas proposed a bill mandating human redundancy in all critical infrastructure roles. None of them reached out to her directly. He didn't take interviews. She ignored the local news vans that camped near her street for days. She unplugged the landline, let the tablet die on its own, and spent a week replanting her winter onions instead. But she did send one statement. No name, no signature. Just a plain text email, routed through a secure Dropbox used by journalists too smart to trace the source. It read, "Not every absence is a loss. Sometimes it's a lesson." That was all. Grid came back online on Wednesday. Bit by bit, region by region, IT teams worked overtime with manuals they didn't know existed until Darlene's binder was pulled from a drawer and photocopied in full. Sections of her code, once flagged as obsolete, were reinstated line for line. Daniels kept the sticky note, laminated it, taped it to the glass case over the main breaker board. Run tests before Monday. The staff stopped laughing at legacy binders. They started asking better questions. Megan led a small team to build a new escalation protocol, one that required dual approvals, human and system. She titled it D. Collins 01. They offered Darlene her job back. Full pay, backdated. She never responded. Instead, she spent Thursday morning in her shed, oiling the old generator and humming a tune nobody'd heard since AM radio. Somewhere down the street, kids chalked her driveway with hearts and lightning bolts. A neighbor left a pie on her porch with a note that just said, "You kept us warm. Thank you." She didn't answer the door, but she ate the pie and smiled just once when the lights flickered back on, because in the end they built systems to replace her, but none to understand her. And that's where they failed.